Officially get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today with our studio visit with Sherin Guirguis, who's been very generous to kind of welcome us into her studio. Um, Before I kind of get started officially, I just wanted to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Holly Jerger. I'm the exhibitions curator at Craft Contemporary, and also on the Zoom kind of running the admin is our curator of public engagement, Andreas Payan Estrada. So thanks to Andreas for keeping us all on track and helping out today. And again, I would really like to thank Sherin for being here today with us. We exhibited Sherin's work, what's getting close to a few years ago. And today she's gonna show us around her studio, talk about some of her past projects, as well as what she's working on now. So I'll go ahead and officially get started. And again, Sherin, thanks so much for being here with us. Sherin was born in Luxor, Egypt, and immigrated to the United States in the late 1980s. She earned a BA in painting and sculpture from the College of Creative Studies at UC Santa Barbara, and an MFA in painting from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Her work has been exhibited in solo and group exhibitions internationally. Some of her bit more local projects and more recent projects, as she was involved in the first iteration of Desert X, which was out in the Coachella Valley, I believe in 2017, if I'm remembering correctly, and also a recent iteration of Desert X in Saudi Arabia. Sherin is also currently working on a metro station project, if I remember correctly. So keep an eye out for when that goes up. And then, as I mentioned, Sherin did have a solo exhibition in 2018 at Craft Contemporary called Of Thorns and Love. And she and 9 other artists are going to be part of an upcoming exhibition we have called Making Time, which we are, I hope, on the verge of installing, and fingers crossed, maybe even being able to open up relatively soon, at least in limited capacity. And Sherin and these 9 other artists have all had solo shows at the museum over the last 10 years. And it's a way for us to kind of recognize their work and look back on their contributions and how they've helped shape the museum over time. And along with her very active studio and exhibition practice, Sherin also teaches at USC as well, and balances that amongst many other things, and a family, and all kinds of ways that she's involved in working. So again, Sherin, thanks so much for sharing your work with us today, and I'll go ahead and kind of hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Holly, for the invitation to speak with you all today, and Andreas for being here. It's always just so good to see you both and to keep my connection with Craft Contemporary. I was really honored to have my show there a few years back, and it was so much amazing things and kind of interesting things happened from that exhibition. If we have time in the end, we can talk about it. But not the least of which is that the exhibition was noticed by a curator who was doing some work in Cairo, and we traveled the show to Cairo, and it was the first time I got to show my work in my home country, which was just amazing. And so just huge gratitude to you, Holly, and to everybody at Craft, because I don't think that would have happened. It was such a interesting connection. So anyways, so Holly did such a good job introducing me, and I think I see some familiar faces and names, so I don't want to go too much into biographical stuff. But for those of you who don't know my work, because of my kind of history, my personal experience of immigration here as a young person, a lot of my work is focused around that narrative. So I really started this kind of overarching idea around my practice as a way to dig up and reveal histories that help me connect my home in Egypt to my home here in LA, and mostly through feminist histories that have been marginalized or have disappeared over time, or sometimes intentionally erased. And so I've built this practice just out of questions I had, as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old coming to America, from Egypt, and all the things I expected and I didn't expect. So like I said, my practice really revolves around this idea of revealing lost histories and erased histories. And I often use the language of architecture, ornamentation. I use a lot of text references. So generally those for every project that I do, and I really do work project by project. And through research, I get to the kind of define the way that the series is articulated. So I usually have at least I start with that narrative that I'm interested in investigating. So for of Thorns and Love, I was interested in understanding the history of feminism in Cairo in the 50s, and through the narrative of and the history of Doria Shafik, which was erased by the nationalist government at the time. And then grounding that into architectural sites that hold pieces of that narrative. So for Doria, there are no public monuments, for example, of her work. Her work is not taught at schools. There is an archive, but it's kind of buried in a special library somewhere, So I went to sites, I documented sites where things had happened. So even if the architecture didn't exist anymore. So I went to Ezbekia Garden, where when she was 19, she gave her first feminist speech, and all that was left was the fence. So I documented the fence. Like Parliament, one of the last big activists, public bits of activism that she accomplished was marching to Parliament and demanding women's rights. And so I went to Parliament, which hasn't really changed that much since the 50s, and documented the fence, documented the building. And I use the ornamentation and the decoration and the architectural elements of those places to kind of reconstruct a sort of abstracted monument and an archive, and kind of realizing the archive of these stories and kind of bringing them back into the present from the past. The last piece is the text. So I usually use a lot of text, mostly poetry. Doria happened to also be a poet, so that one was easy. And I looked through a lot of her poems and used excerpts from her poems to, again, contextualize both her relationship, with her country and my country, and my relationship with that. She traveled a lot, and she herself had a lot of kind of strained relationships with her identity as an Egyptian, and of course, being in diaspora, I had a lot of questions around that. So for every project, there are those three kind of building blocks that I usually start with. Let's see. So I think, Holly, you were asking if I could show some process, like how some of these projects start.
Sure, definitely. And I wanted to mention, I even see too your printed portrait of Doria and a photograph of her behind you as well.
Yeah. So as part of my process, I usually build these kind of research walls. So as I'm reading through, and finding images and references, I usually kind of start. So this is the remnants. There's certain things that just never get taken down. And Andreas, I think you and I did this workshop, right, at Craft Contemporary, where we did these silkscreen prints. So some things are just too, close to the heart. And so a lot of pieces from the archive, my research that I did for that project kind of just stayed. So these are all my favorite things you'll get to see today. Is there any questions so far just about what I just talked about?
No, I don't think so. So
Okay.
Shireen, yeah, if you want to go ahead and talk about some of the projects, that would be great.
Okay, so I'm gonna switch cameras here, and then I excuse the wobble. This camera is not very stable, but this way you get to see a little bit more. And I'm gonna pin it so I can see what I'm doing. Okay, there. So y'all can see this. So I just
Yeah.
figured I'd pull some examples of how I start with projects. So it's always this stack of books, right? I think I have the Doria book here, which I think Holly and I always laugh at because, you know, it's kind of like shredded to bits.
It's been
um,
well loved and used.
yeah, this is what happens when feminist icons only have one biography. So you just have to like pour through. And then some poetry books that her family sent me from her archive that are in French. So it's always kind of like a good thing to do to try to translate those. And well, we can, if we have time, we'll look at that
Oh,
beautiful
great. The
camera,
catalog from the
Holly.
exhibition. Yeah.
So you usually for each project, there's a kind of stack of books that I have that I do research. So I have some sketches from my most recent large site-specific project, which is Khulkhal Aliya, that I did in a small village in Saudi Arabia named Alula. And so, you know, when I was invited to do that, I started thinking, okay, well, what I had to learn about the site, even though I couldn't quite be there. I only had one site visit, so that was very challenging. But I knew a lot, I know the region relatively well. And so I was kind of drawing on my relationship to the region and knowing that my interest in kind of figuring out, well, who were the poets? Who were the women poets specifically in the region? And were there any? A lot of times you just think, that doesn't exist. But of course, there was a very extensive history of oral poetry in the Arabian Peninsula that I was completely ignorant of. And so, I got all the books that I can get my hands on in English and even some in Arabic, and started understanding kind of the history of Nabati poetry. And then I had my mom and I collect these Bedouin jewelry pieces
Wow.
called khulkhat. Yeah, and so she usually when she finds some, we have so many different kinds that you can see here. I work with a lot of different kinds, and these are really special because they're often given as almost like wedding rings or promise
Oh,
rings and engagement
wow.
rings. So this one goes on the ankle. You can see it's quite big. And then these are bracelets. So I love the idea of the khulkhal as a symbol of unity and connectivity, and but as you can see also here, it's a very powerful object. So I see them almost like armor. This beautiful armor that the Bedouin women wear, and of course these super decorative ones are often used in rituals and ceremonies and
Mhm.
things like that. Um,
Shireen, do you know if those are contemporary pieces or are they more historic?
these are all pretty old, so these are. Um, I don't know the dates, but I don't know if you can kind of see like this one's completely weathered
Hmm.
and cracked and things. So these are quite old. You can get new ones, but I really love the ones that you can tell have been worn
Hmm.
because again, because the idea of like embedding the history in these decorative elements and the politics and the stories and the things around them. And so I'm going to move this so I can see a little bit more.
Sure.
Sorry, thank you. And the idea that these get passed down also from mother to mother, and they get passed on to me from my mother. So there's this kind of lineage of how the object gets passed down. And so, I went out there, I took lots of photos, and I made a lot of terrible little sketches. You know, um, sad. Look at these little people
Ah,
in the desert. And so, really, I think a basic process that most artists have, once I decided where the space was going to be, then just really thinking about um, how I wanted the piece to look, and then tons and tons of notes, both from what I've been reading and from my research on the site, starting to come up with a kind of formal vocabulary with which I was going to kind of create the work. And then at the same time, I work with my fabricators and, they do this stuff I find boring, like the digital renditions and, these terrible 3D printed things. I'm more into this is how I sketch sculptures, like
Yeah.
scotch tape and cardboard. So that's more my thinking process. So you could kind of see like this could potentially be a future sculpture, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, wow.
So you could kind of, so this pile usually stays on my desk and I do stuff with it. But,
and you sort of always save your sketches, and even if I recall, you tend to save even like the interiors of your cut forms too.
Yeah, because I'm definitely a pack rat. So I always feel like I can't throw, I work with archives and I work with lost material, so it's so hard to throw anything. I was like, I might need that. And especially the cut paper, because it's actually quite a lot of material. So I always think like, I'm going to make a project. One day I will, Holly. It's going to happen. Let's see. I'll show you a couple more. I'll show you this one because then I can show you the more developed sketches. So something like this, obviously, after this phase, it doesn't exist in the studio anymore. It exists in a giant warehouse at my fabricators in Portland. And I could show you some pictures of, the scale and things of that. So when it's these large scale sculptures, then they kind of exit my life, my immediate studio life, and then I work on them on site and I work on them.
Yeah, and that is a really important point about your work. I think that you do pieces that exist as like two-dimensional wall works and gallery pieces, but you have done an extensive amount of like site-specific pieces and larger scale work as well. And you're kind of, it seems like you sort of are always kind of crisscrossing back and forth.
I know it's a total mess. I know. But that's how it goes, right? So like a painting project that I'm working on right now is based on this book that I read, called The Conference of the Birds. It's a pretty well-known book by Autar. It's a spiritual kind of search, and it's this group of 30 birds that essentially travels together to find the meaning of life, find this smorg, find God. And what they find instead is a reflective pool, and they see their own reflection, and they understand that it's their coming together, it's their communing, it's their journey that is the ultimate spiritual enlightenment. And I was reading this with a group of very close friends of mine, mostly artists, mostly women. And it was right at the height of the pandemic when, life was really even more unsure, and we were all kind of reflecting and reevaluating, and so as I was reading with them, I was doing all, we would read to each other, and, I just was just making these kind of little sketches that were almost like portraits. There were portraits of us and there were portraits of the birds. And so, it was just kind of, we would read for a couple of hours and I would just kind of doodle on these and, I mean, thousands of these while drawing. And then I was invited to do an exhibition at Shangri-La. Okay, hang on to your seats. I'm going to move you. Here we go. Let's see. And I decided that this is what I wanted to do for the Shangri-La exhibition. Left. So you can see the next phase was, you know, doing the larger scale sketches, color tests. Um, um, I often use very brilliant colors that are layered and kind of get dark and deep. And for this group of paintings, I really wanted to use a very different palette. I don't know if you can quite tell from the lighting here, but it's very ephemeral. The ink is extremely translucent, and so it's much less color. At least you can see the top row. The bottom row I'm still wondering about. And I'm going to do a series that um, almost like of portraits of this group that held me up during this period, of these women that were reading. And this, you know, I love this idea. It was an idea of a friend of mine, Amatis Modafali, who's another LA artist, that you know, instead of a book club that where we all read and we come to kind of discuss what we've read, instead we would meet and actually read aloud to each other as an act of caretaking. You know, and I absolutely was just so grateful to her to have, you know, put this group together. And so and it really was a healing process to be read to, especially this book. I think that was just the right combination of things. So I'm going to keep moving you around unless you have questions.
I don't think so. No, this is really great. And I think you bring up a really interesting point too, that are like with reading to one another. That is such a thing that I think is kind of just relegated to childhood, and that
yeah,
you're right, that
like nobody reads to us anymore. Okay,
no,
I hope I don't make you sick, like seasick, but I gotta move you over here.
We're kind of slowly bouncing with you, and that's okay.
All right. I'm gonna try to get all this whole wall in here, so hang on.
Okay.
See, this is my camera skills. I should have made like stage marks for myself. All right, here we go. Can you sort of see that?
Yeah.
There we go.
The new pieces that you're working on.
Okay. Sorry. Look away for a second. There we go. So I wanted to show you also, so the pieces I'm doing that another set of things I was doing actually during quarantine. Okay. Yeah. Now you can look. I'm going to stop moving it so you don't feel so sick. There. So the other thing I was doing, and this was probably before I got into this reading group, was, you know, like I was home, I couldn't go to the studio. My brain, I thought, oh, I'm going to get all this research done and I'm going to do all this new work and I could read. And I actually couldn't. I don't know how it was for you all, but I couldn't stay focused. I was too stressed to actually be critical and read something. You know, I don't know. There was a serious block there. And so I just set up a little table by my window at home and I would just paint these little circles, which just sounds terribly silly, right? But I decided that I have this stack of watercolor paper that, and I just, I made a circle and I was just like, I'm just going to keep making these circles. And that's what I did. So it's very different, it's not like research based or story based or anything.
Yeah, well, or even with your other paintings, because if I remember correctly, you kind of apply the ink and you kind of are moving the paper around, and they have these almost like explosive.
Yeah, I'm gonna get you closer. I know, and these are so delicate. And here, let me see if I can get us a little closer. Yep. So yeah, you can see there's just not any of that. That kind of explosion. The palette is entirely soft. Maybe this kind of stage, like maybe that contains anxiety or something. We could probably psychoanalyze these a lot, but no, hang on. I need a cameraman. or camera woman.
We all do need
The
those
whole
these
thing
days,
now.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
you're a camera person and
Yes.
lighting and artist.
And a stylist. Anyway, so yeah, I started making these, and when you kind of talked to me, Holly, about the show, I was like, well, I don't know if you want to show these, but that is what I'm making right now. So you can see how they kind of look larger.
Sherin, did you have to like make like a barrier of some kind to kind of keep the different layers within that circle, or just
Yeah,
how
can
did
you
you do
sort
that
of see it
technically?
there? Yeah, so I kind of tape off right here. Can you guys see that? Tape off this triangle. I paint until I think I'm done painting, and then I peel that off, and then you can see here. I think you can see here, yep.
Yeah,
Where it's being
that's
cut.
cut.
Yeah, and then this one, I'm trying some different things with this one. So this is, I don't know if this is gonna look good or not, but I'm because I had this paper stretched, so I have all this nice space in the back. So I don't know if you can tell, but there's another layer of paper behind here with a different pattern.
Okay.
So that's one of the experiments I'm kind of working on here. Maybe adding some elements back there. I kind of like that little space in the back that you can't really access. And I work with mashrabiyah patterns all the time. So the nice thing about doing a series of work that's slightly outside of what I quote unquote normally do is that you could try. I can experiment with form and with style a little bit more. And this, yeah.
And the patterns that you're cutting into the paper there, are those specific references as well, or how are you generating?
No, I just like went through my stack of patterns. Again, with this series is such an anomaly because I was just like, is whatever I happen to have or, remember, because I was out of the studio, So, yeah, but I couldn't really get them done until I was here, and I could. I don't know if there's anything else you want to see. Cause see here, I'll show you. You get the whole tour.
Right, sure. Are
So
those pieces of Shangri-La that you showed us the
yeah. So those are. So that's kind of my trial for that for the what am I talking about? The Conference of the Birds series. You can see that, and then another circle piece out with my projector. So I usually you can turn that on, and just like my little experiments over there. Yeah. So you really get, that's the whole setup. So I have all these little setups: a painting setup, a drawing setup.
You actually use an old school overhead projector.
Yeah,
still.
I know. Isn't that terrible?
Are
wonderful. Anybody has one they're trying to get rid of. I don't know why.
Actually, Sherin, we'll sidebar on this. We might have one at the museum still that we haven't used in
I will
forever.
take any old projectors off your hands if you like.
Good to know.
Yeah. So there's that little corner. Yeah.
Sherin, Patricia had a comment that regarding your recent series that you just showed us, that the spheres, she can't help thinking about the virus structure itself and like the replication of the virus.
Yeah, that's there. Of course, I wasn't even thinking about it. You know how I don't know what I was thinking. I just was like, what's the simplest possible form? And of course, it makes sense that it would be like a virus because it's the simplest possible form that can be.
The simplest and most resilient. In this case, a bad way form and structure out there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see, I could turn the projector on. I'll just scoot you all around. Here, we're almost all the way around, so I'll scoot you around, and then we'll go back to my desk. Can you see that I turned the projector on, but you can't really tell. And then this is all my messy bits. This is like, I don't know what, there's piles of things that I don't know what they are. And I'm back on my desk.
And Sherin, how did you, this question I've never asked you, but like, how did you make that jump from like just doing sort of traditional paintings per se to actually incorporating the cut elements into them?
Wow, that actually, I feel like those two things happen feels like all at once. I was making, right before I was making this type of work, I guess, I was making these big, like wood sculptures first that were really minimal. And so I think because I was moving from sculpture to painting, and I always kind of hover between those two spaces, and I was thinking about mashrabiyas, and I was thinking about architecture. So I just was like, I'm just, it was like really one-to-one, right? I was like, I'm just gonna make a mashrabiya out of paper because I couldn't afford to make one out of wood, Yeah. And then of course the paintings and the drawings kind of started happening together, and I was initially looking at cloud forms and explosions. Actual pictures of explosions from the Iraq War actually was the first series I did in this format. And the cutting through the paper became really important because it's about piercing through time and space, and it's constructive and destructive, at the same time. It has all these kind of panopticon connotations, being able to see through or not, or be seen or see, So so I knew, I'm gonna sneeze again. Hold on. Wait, no. Okay, it passed. So I knew right away that was a format I really was interested in, And I love this idea of these two different types of, and I talk about this a lot actually, is like the two different types of organizational systems that come together. So like a system that's organic and rhizomatic, like the way that the paint naturally wants to flow on paper and create those rhizomatic patterns. And then these ancient sacred geometries that create these other types of infinite and hard edge patterns, and how they come together, how these two systems integrate, how they kind of juxtapose, how they sometimes feel like they're in opposition, sometimes feel like they're in concert and in harmony. And to me, just embodied in that formal kind of conversation, I found was really embodied my experience being here, this experience of like unbelonging, this experience of feeling like you're in between these two spaces, and you're neither home here or you're not home there, and you're like, kind of existing in a constant state of tension or ambiguity. The space is just outside of mainstream culture, like the spaces where the people that don't fit in kind of exist.
Sherin, I'm not sure if you have them handy, but do you have any images of, or like, because I'm wondering if some folks might not be familiar with like the mashrabeya and kind of what they are and how they function, or
those paintings. I have one. It's too heavy for me to move around, so I just kind of leave it out.
I think I maybe saw it there in a corner.
Yeah, let's see. It's pretty big, so I'm gonna have to roll back. Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah.
That weird white thing is just the light reflecting in it.
Because the piece is framed with glass over it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's, I should have pulled out a few more of those, but that one is the door. So that one's based on the door of Huda Sha'arawi's house, um, which was where the very first women's organization in Egypt, they would meet in secret to read and to have literary conferences. So, again, this idea of reading literature together, reading poetry, reciting, reading to each other, creating access through books and knowledge is just something that's really thread through for me. Yeah. So I don't know. You want me to get closer?
Sure. I don't know how far you can roll over, but if it's
I can roll pretty far. I'm wireless right now, so it's just, can you handle the wobbliness?
See if everybody can take the boat ride over there.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
Okay. So can you see great. How it's cut through?
Yeah. The cutting's not just in that sort of central form. It really extends throughout the whole piece.
It goes through the whole piece, yeah. And then you could kind of see, let me see if there's a spot here, actually right there. So that's kind of what I was talking about, where, the geometry and the paint start to intersect and to get scrambled, and you can't quite tell what's what, and it really collapses and flattens the space there. So that kind of formal language I'm really interested in.
And then even have, because if I recall correctly, you've painted the backside of the paper as well, and that's why that sort of pink or kind of is short.
Yeah, let me see if I have a piece that's not framed here. So I'll show you this piece. So this piece, and then that's what it looks like in the back. Right. So when you put it up against a white background, it gives that kind of pink,
the reflection,
halo, which is what you're seeing there. Yeah, and again, it's all about creating physically creating a space behind the painting. Anything else you want to see?
And like you were even saying that the kind of making space where oftentimes people think there isn't space, or where kind of society doesn't provide space for people. You're creating
it. Exactly.
Sherin, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the Shangri-La series. Annie did ask, it seems like she was seeing on your pieces on the floor a specific form, or she actually thought maybe it might be like hippos or perhaps an animal form. But you said that those really are, it's interesting where you're using sight or even motif as in this case as portraits of like specific people, and even like your show at Craft Contemporary, where these things really became, you said monuments, but I guess maybe one could even call them portraits to a certain degree of like Doria Shafik. Could you maybe talk a little bit more about maybe once the painting is there, how you react to the shapes or the textures it creates, and then even that idea of making like non-representational portraits of people?
Yeah, well, that was a good eye on the hippos. That one was representational. I didn't think you could see that because I was on the phone. Yeah, so that was an older painting that I pulled out recently because I'm doing some work in Egypt this time in a kind of in an archaeological site. So I had done some paintings a long time ago. I never showed that had some elements from ancient Egyptian friezes and reliefs, and so that's what you saw.
Good eye, Annie.
Yes, good one. This idea of portraiture and monument, and again, like I think because I'm working with real people, you can't help but think about portraiture. And especially with the Conference of the Birds series, because they're actually, like these mountains and these pigeon coops is what I was looking at and working with. But they start, we think of them as bodies. We always kind of project this idea of the body in the landscape. And I love that ambiguity. And again, like, it's all about that tension between, things that are abstracted, and you start to see hints of things that aren't. And using the form of cut paper too, I think really pushes that kind of, I don't want to use ambiguity again, but I'm gonna, pushes that kind of mixing or hybridity of something that's two-dimensional becomes sculptural. And a lot of times the sculptures, like, I don't know where the thing went, but they're, the three-dimensional sculptures are actually made of two-dimensional planes. And so again, it's always about that threshold space, right? And I think that's why the Mashrabeh was, and the fences and things like that are really interesting to me. There are the spaces that demarcate the kind of movement from public to private space, and so how things move into public space. So our bodies being the private spaces, the portraits as body, and then the monument is that body in public, right? So I do think about those things when I'm working on the forms, but I don't set out necessarily to make it feel like this. I think it's just the nature of the kind of content that I work on, and I do want them to be reflective of that narrative, So maybe I'm doing it subconsciously. I'm not sure.
And Sherin, I know you said you maybe did put together some images or a project that you wanted to show the PowerPoint of, or sorry, not
Sure,
a PowerPoint necessarily, or some images.
Yeah, I was going to show, if you all are interested, I can show some images of the completed Khulkhel piece, Khulkhel Alia. So I did find a poem that was by Alia El-Khutebi, who I actually, till this day, and there was a whole team, me and the curatorial team were trying to find out just like when she was alive, and we really couldn't even find that information.
Oh, wow.
I did find this beautiful poem that she wrote about moving. A lot of the Bedouin community was moved out of this kind of nomadic space into the cities. And there was kind of a dismantling of the nomadic lifestyle in all of the Arab Peninsula and in North Africa as well, actually. And so I got I used an excerpt from her poem. I don't know if you can see, maybe you can see in this picture. Can you see my cursor?
Oh, the writing on the interior.
Yeah, so I inscribed the poem into the piece. So when you first encounter the piece, you see it like this person here. You're looking just at the outside black bar, and from far away, it actually looks just like a black line, like this very minimal stripe. And then as you approach it, you start to see these light tunnels that I had carved through the piece, that are gold leaf with 24 karat gold, and they pull the light through.
Wow.
And then it reveals the next layer, which is the text. So you can see how it looks from far away. It's almost completely flat.
And you said you had only visited the site once before. Is that when you were able to find that sort of particular crevice?
Yeah,
I'm not
so
sure
we walked the site. Yeah, we walked the site, and it was a huge, huge valley, and it was just like one of those things. Like, what am I going to make here? Like, I think you can sort of see how beautiful and intricate and incredible. Look at this rock formation. So this whole valley is kind of enclosed with these and you can, I don't know if you can kind of tell the scale. These massive and ancient rock formations. They're beautiful. And so you're like, how do you make art here? You know? So it took us about an hour to cross the valley, and because of everything that was going on, and we had such a short period of time, it was like 2 p.m., you know, and we're literally walking through the desert because to get to the site, there was a camel farm, so we couldn't take the cars in. There's no roads, there's nothing. So we just hiked and hiked and hiked, and I didn't have a hat or water. You know? I think we just got to this place, and you see all those rocks. It was really shady, and we sat on the rocks. There's this one right here in the middle that looks almost like a little bench. These little boulders, and we just sat there. And when you sit there and you're facing out, you see the whole, which I don't think I have a shot of, I'm going to add it, but the whole length of the valley in front of you. And it's just the most beautiful thing you've ever seen. And in a place where so few people have ever, you know, traversed. So you could almost, it just felt like you could see a whole history of this nomadic culture in front of you there. And so I knew immediately. I sat there, I turned to Neville and was like, this is where I'm going to make the work. And I absolutely love the intimacy of that space. So it's both grand and magnificent and intimate and kind of safe, you know? So I like that there are these two U shapes, the U shape of the cavern and the U shape of the Khulkhel. And then when they come together, you're actually surrounded by this circle. So you feel very sheltered in that space. And I love that dialogue of shelter in the desert, because people often think about the desert as this, you know, empty place that's so harsh and it's kind of anti-human, when I think it's actually us who are anti-desert, you know? So those were some of the pictures I wanted to show. And that's looking at it straight up. And then the experience, you know, this idea of almost like a kind of ritual of seeing the piece. You look at it from outside, you look up at it into the sky, and then you turn around and you look through it to the desert. And then when you look through it to the desert, you see the text. You're able to read the text if you can read Arabic. And it describes what you're seeing. It describes the loss of that, right? So then it's the loss that she felt, waking up at night in the city and remembering what the desert looks like under the full moon.
And was that a temporary installation of that work, or?
Yeah, it was. It was taken down. I think they're going to reinstall it at the. They just built. Alula is like I was saying, is a very small village, but it has a lot of really incredible traditional arts. That the Bedouin women still, you know, they weave and they make all kinds of work, you know, and so they are creating a museum for the folkloric and traditional arts of Alula, and so this will be installed there.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
What
Here's the poem if anybody's interested. And you could see I made it so it just kind of floats there. In this one, you could kind of see the cables. So people always ask me how we got it in there. So it's actually cabled in, but you really can't see that when you're standing under it. It just looks like it's hovering above you. So it becomes like a crown, and it becomes, you know, like a frame. So it you know, things I have to say I can't even take credit for, because I can only imagine certain bits that I was hoping for, you know, and then all kinds of other things happened once it was there, you know, like the kind of piece evolved into all kinds of other things and other relationships.
Right. The beauty and complexity of site-specific work, right? It's like, no matter how much you plan in advance, I mean, and really that even goes for all work, right? Until it's actually really in the space, it is imagining to a certain degree.
Yeah. I was just I don't know if we have time, but I also worked with 8 of the elders from the tribe. So it turns out that the women are the ones that weave all the tents, and that tradition is dying out. And so as a sister piece to the sculpture, I worked with this group of women who still know how to hand weave the tents, and we traced the inside of the ring in wool, in seto, with the text on it. And so this is them visiting the site, and we were talking about what the piece is, what I wanted it to be, and this is I got a chance to go. They were finishing up the last pieces when I went there to install, so I got to kind of see their process. And you could probably tell from her hands, but these are the elders from the tribes. So they were telling me that a lot of their daughters weren't interested in learning these skills anymore because it's so physically demanding, and it was, they were living, they're not living in tents anymore. Although I have to say they do use the tents a lot still, but they don't live in them anymore. They usually have community tents where they gather. So you can see here, I didn't actually end up getting like proper installation shots of this, but you can see the settle on the plinth there. And so I worked with them to just have it black on black. And then people were invited. We had a lot of colorful wool, and people were invited to come in and weave in and knot in and tie in the colorful wool, and in doing so, revealing the text again. Mm-hmm. But I just have like Instagram photos of this because it was like at the very end and everybody's exhausted. And and that's actually Zahra. And she's going to be in the current Desert X that opens March 11th. She's an incredible artist, and she was in that show. So she came to, support me. And this is one of the tents we met in. So a part of the project was to, another artist, Manala Dewani, and I wanted to make sure we had a lot of conversations around why we were there and how we were there. The last thing you want to do is show up in a small village and just like, here's contemporary art, and lo and behold, of course, this group of young women are all contemporary artists, and they are all from Alula. And we did a whole series of programming with them. We did crits. They could bring their work. And we gave them critiques on their work. We talked about process. So I give a couple of lectures just around the process of making art, and they were able to ask me questions around how to kind of support their practices. Mm-hmm. They came and did a lot of site visits while we were installing, and they were able to ask questions and kind of see the whole process from beginning to end. And that was an initiative that Manel and I kind of really wanted to push. Which is making sure that there was a reason for not just kind of an art community that flies into town, but that there's a reason and there's a kind of conversation that happens with the artists and just the everyday community members in Alula too. So, yeah.
Wow. And for those artists, where would they have opportunities to like show their work or practice there?
They don't. A lot of them show their work on Instagram. I mean, there were a lot of very simple obstacles, like they are not around a lot of other artists. So Instagram is the way that they kind of communicate with the world. Up to a few months from when we were there, they were not able to drive, and so they couldn't even go out and take photographs and do research and do, they had very limited means, but it didn't really stop them from making work. In fact, a lot of times, one of them was doing this really incredible series, taking pictures of different corners of her room and the sun moving through her room over time. And, so they were extremely ambitious and talented and engaged, and they made it work with what they have, and they showed in their local, in the local coffee shop and the garden, and they and so it was really nice to be able to go to a place that's so inaccessible and better, that have a better understanding of the community there. And, I had all these preconceived notions about what Saudi Arabia was going to be and who, what women in Saudi Arabia were going to be like. And I went to the city and, in Jeddah, and there was a big art fair, and it was very, contemporary, just like you would downtown LA. But there were also these spaces, and I love that art can actually exist in all these different spaces. It can exist in big cosmopolitan areas. It can exist in tiny little villages. I was kind of shocked at how many people were in this group, all practicing, sculptors, photographers, painters. It was pretty great, and it really broke down my own kind of biases around and expectations around what I was going to see there.
Yeah, well, that's great that you could really spend some time there and immerse yourself in the community. And yes, I imagine, especially with a place like Saudi Arabia, it would be probably most of us would enter that space with a probably quite narrow view, and also too, I think just that, I don't know, I think sometimes there can be a tendency when people live very differently than you do, and you view them as having, and not that there isn't truth to this, but very sort of repressed or limited sort of society that they kind of can't be creative, I guess, or, you can come in with that notion, but obviously these women prove that very untrue.
Yeah.
Well, sure. Sherin, thank you so much. We have hit about the 2:00 mark or so. So I just wanted to ask before maybe we start to close out, just if anyone else had any other questions. Sherin, some comments as you were describing your piece there, just talking about several people said that it was really beautiful work, and they really appreciated the scale, and even your imagery of the work installed really helped give context to scale and the place of it. And just that it's your work is fantastic and very beautiful work and ideas. And we really, I'm glad that you have been, I know it's been challenging, but that you have been able to create at least to some degree during this past year. And you were saying when we were chatting the other day that it does seem like now projects are starting to kind of come back online or open up. So did you want to share, as I mentioned, everyone, Sherin will have work in our upcoming exhibition, Making Time. And we are about ready to hopefully, nothing else crazy happening with the world or COVID rates. In the moment, we'll hopefully be installing that show over about the next month or so, and we'll keep you all posted on its progress and opening. Sherin, did you want to share any other projects that you're working on or coming up so that folks can keep a lookout for those?
Well, this Shangri-La show, hopefully we'll see in October, which will be great, and that will be in Honolulu. And then in Cairo in the fall, I'll be doing a very large site, another large site-specific sculpture. So I can't say too much about it, but I'm really, really excited. And yeah, so doing that research now has been really nice, and kind of, any opportunity I have to show there, I really, it's a thrill. And this one in particular, it's in a very special site. So.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And this will be your second time then showing in Egypt?
Third now.
Oh, third now. Okay.
Starting to get used to it. Once I can fly again, it'll be really great. Yeah.
And everyone, thank you so much. Sherin, just some comments coming in thanking you.
Yeah,
and
thank
it was
you
interesting
all for being here.
Yeah, you brought up the Conference of the Birds. I wasn't on it, but I think for any members who attended, there was a walkthrough at of an artist named Mohammed, I'm Barangi, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, at Advoc Artsy gallery downtown. And he had a series of print-based work that was also in reference to Conference of the Birds. So just kind of interesting.
It was a beautiful show.
You got a chance to see it?
I saw it online, but yeah.
Great. So anyway, just interesting that these two visits sort of back to back are referencing that work as well. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today, spending some of your afternoon with us. We will keep you posted on next month's member visit. And again, Sherin, thank you so much. Again, there's a lot of thank yous coming in. We really appreciate your very beautiful and eloquent discussion behind your work. And again, thanks for setting up your studio and showing us around.
Anytime. I look forward to you coming in person soon.
Let's hope so. Let's hope it is pretty soon. And we look forward to that too.
Yeah. Then thank you all for joining us. And we'll keep you posted for next month, which will be a studio visit with Mimi Haddon. And thank you so much, Sherin.